questions. Our next question is from the Conservative Party's Mr. Seeback.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, I know that one of the things that we consistently try to work on, it's a priority for our government, is keeping citizens safe. We brought forward a number of pieces of legislation in this Parliament, the Safe Streets and Community Act being one of them. I think this is another important piece of legislation when we think about community safety. Maybe you could explain for us why this bill is so important and what it will do to help protect Canadians.
Again, I think this is an important component of what we do. And you're quite correct. We've introduced dozens of pieces of legislation, all with the aim of better protecting the public, and at the same time making sure that the interests of victims are heard and that they are considered. And this bill is consistent with our efforts to better represent victims across this country. And indeed, this is why I believe that so many victims are pleased and supportive of what we are proposing in Bill C-54. As I indicated in answer to an earlier question, to ensuring that the victims are notified when an individual is being discharged, I think is only fair and appropriate. Again, as I indicated to you, this is if requested, if they want to be notified. I mean, I've had victims sometimes say to me, "Look, I don't want to hear about this," and that's fair enough. But for those victims who do want to be notified, I think it's fair that the regime in place have that. Allow for non-communication orders between an individual. If an individual gets released into the community, the ability to have a non-communication order between that individual and the victims. I think this is only reasonable. I think this is only fair. And again, these are one of the important components of this particular bill. Ensure that the safety of victims is considered when decisions are being made. We don't want anybody to be victimized again in this country over and over again. We don't want that. And so, yes, a major component of what we are doing here is to ensure that those individual concerns of victims are recognized. And so I indicated you 3 different components of what we are doing for victims. And again, I believe these are all very reasonable, and I think they will stand the test of time. And indeed, it's my hope that when you have individuals before or groups before this committee, that this comes up for discussion, because again, I've been very encouraged by the comments that I have heard, and indeed the comments from my provincial counterparts for that matter as well.
Yeah, well, I think when you say reasonable, I think in a lot of circumstances, specifically what you were just talking about, they're just common sense. I mean, if you went and talked to the average person on the street and let them know that these are the kinds of things that are going to be included in this bill, boy, I think they'd say, wow, I can't believe that wasn't part of the system before. So I think those changes are going to be quite welcomed by the vast majority of Canadians. One other thing I quickly want to talk about is when you talk about, in one of the sections we amend, we talk about putting public safety as a stronger consideration. Maybe you could comment on that a little bit.
That's a very good point. What we say is that public safety will be the paramount consideration when the boards make a decision with respect to a not criminally responsible individual. Now, there are individuals who will say, yeah, that was one of the considerations. That's in the list. I appreciate that, and you appreciate that. What we're saying is that this should be the number one, the paramount consideration to begin with, in terms of making sure that the public is protected, this individual. And again, what we have found on other pieces of legislation, you're not just protecting the public, you're protecting the individual from getting involved with something like that. Again, everybody has a stake, everybody has an interest in that. And so, yes, you're quite correct. We have made that very clear. And that's in addition, of course, to the other provisions that I believe better protect people and the ones that are specific to victims. And so you have that, but again, that's something that you will hear in your discussion of this, Mr. Chairman. And again, I believe that's one of the very reasonable propositions that we have put in this bill. The protection of the public is the paramount consideration when a decision is being made with respect to an NCR accused. And I think that's only fair and reasonable, and I think you will hear support of that, and certainly I hope that gets your support, as I'm sure it will.
Thank you very much, Mr. Seeback. Thank you, Minister.